Great, thank you all for coming to tonight's webinar on the State Route 89 Recreation Corridor Management Plan. We are going to be walking through the final plan recommendations for our final webinar of this planning process, and hopefully provide some more insight into the next steps and how we will be moving forward with this plan. The planning team that has worked on this plan for the last 2 years includes myself, Devin Middlebrook with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, Mike Gabor with the United States Forest Service Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, Michelle Glicker with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, Danielle Hughes with the Tahoe Transportation District, and leading our consultant team has been Stephanie Grigsby with Design Workshop, who is here tonight to help me present during this webinar. This was the welcome. We will dive into our presentation next and then open it up to Q&A. I think most people are familiar with Zoom and these digital platforms by now, but at the bottom of your screen, you do have a Q&A button. Please use that to submit questions. There is a chat, but we would prefer all of those questions to be submitted to the Q&A function. Before we begin, we do want to have a short survey to understand who's tuned in tonight to better understand comments, questions, and thoughts on this plan. So I will start this, and we just want to get an idea of who you are and where you're at. So I'm going to launch the polling. The first question is, which of the following best describes you? Full-time resident, seasonal resident, you're a day visitor to Tahoe, an overnight visitor to Tahoe. And then the second question is, if you are a full-time or seasonal resident for South Lake in Lake Tahoe, what part of Lake Tahoe is your home located? So we'll give people a minute to fill that out. Great, thank you all for participating in that. Looks like the majority of the folks responded are mixed between full-time and seasonal residents. It's good to see a few visitors to Tahoe on this webinar tonight, and predominantly those people are from the West Shore area of El Dorado County, which is in our planning area, so very relevant to that group of folks. Moving through to our presentation. Corridor planning, for those of you that have not heard this presentation before or are unaware, corridor planning is how in the Tahoe Basin we move from overall transportation vision that's outlined in the Regional Transportation Plan towards implementation and marry transportation and recreation and daily travel together to provide a more seamless travel experience through Tahoe without reliance on the private automobile. The first corridor plan developed was the 28 corridor along the East Shore. And since that, we've seen the success of the trail connecting Incline Village to Sand Harbor, which will soon go from Sand Harbor to Spooner Summit, and all the parking and transit improvements that went along with that. In 2020, today, we are previewing the 89 corridor plan, which goes from roughly West Way in South Lake Tahoe up to the Placer El Dorado County line near Tahoma to the north, and includes recreation spots such as Emerald Bay, the Camp Ridge beaches, DL Bliss, Sugar Pine, and Meeks Bay. And then also today there are 3 additional corridor plans under development, including Placer County's Resort Triangle Transportation Plan in the North Shore, US 50 East, and the South Shore Main Street Management Plan. Again, the steering committee for this plan was the 3 agencies, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, Tahoe Transportation District, and United States Forest Service. Our consultant team, led by Design Workshop, included transportation consulting firms LSC and Fair and Pierce, Orca, which is ex-Disney officials who specialize in visitor experience, and Karen Mullen-Ely, local community and communications specialist. Our plan was developed alongside with many of our partners, both public agencies, private businesses, and nonprofits. We also had extensive outreach from stakeholders, businesses in the corridor, user groups, and homeowners associations. We've also done a number of public events to help gain input from a variety of sources. The vision for this corridor is really about preserving an icon by increasing travel choices for those that are enjoying it. The desired conditions and the outcome we're hoping for is really to find a balance and cooperatively manage the corridor for environmental improvement and quality travel experience. We want to make sure that we're balancing all of the natural cultural resources, the infrastructure, the visitor experience, and then also the quality of life for those residents that call that corridor home either full-time or seasonally. It also is important to understand that we have two key implementation tools. The first is the fact that we're using interconnected strategies. When you talk about transit and a shuttle service, you don't just talk about adding a bus, which just brings more people to the corridor. You have to do that in concert with parking management strategies, technology to let people either reserve a spot on the bus or let them know what parking is available. And then also the infrastructure to support that, including the technology and the facilities such as trash cans and restrooms. So all of those are interconnected to enhance the visitor experience, protect the environment, and promote safety. Then adaptive management is also a key part of the plan. You don't want to just put something on the ground, set it and forget it and hope for the best. You want to consistently monitor as you implement in order to adjust, and you can adjust if you're meeting your goals, you can adjust back if you need to, you can adjust forward, but you really want to make sure that you're on the ground and constantly improving what you see happening on the corridor as you implement. Overall, throughout the corridor, there's a set of overall corridor recommendations, including completion of the Tahoe Trail, the paved shared use path that is envisioned to go around the Tahoe Basin to give that full recreation experience. Transit and reservation systems. As we've noticed on the East Shore Express has been very successful in moving people to Sand Harbor without the need for their vehicles. So that is something throughout this corridor we're recommending as well. Restriction of roadside parking. Again, we're not just adding transit, we're also offsetting car parking where it's illegally happening or maybe not as safely happening in the corridor, and moving those folks to either off highway parking lots or to the transit system. Identifying ways we can reduce congestion at the Pope Beach and Jameson Beach roads near the southern part of the corridor. We've heard off-season access and winter access is important not only for recreation such as backcountry skiing, but also for residents and businesses that need to commute back and forth through South Shore, and emergency vehicles that need to respond to calls. And then throughout all of this, it's really important that we have increased operational resources and coordination among agencies. We understand we're adding more infrastructure, and we want to make sure that we have a plan to operate and maintain it at a high level into the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to discuss more about our recommended travel framework.
Thanks, Stefan. So as you mentioned, this slide really talks about what our vision is for the travel framework. As Stefan talked about, the vision for this corridor is really where we can think about preserving Emerald Bay and the icon that the West Shore is by providing different travel options. And our goal and vision for it is to be able to have a mode split, which is represented by those different icons that you see in the left, with 44% of people arriving via transit, 10% of people arriving via bike, 5% through water transit, and then 41% through parking and being able to access recreation destinations by a personal vehicle. And that is really a significant difference than how people arrive today, where it's primarily 100% of people arriving via their own vehicles, which, because there's limited infrastructure, creates these roadside parking conditions that then also has a spiraling effect with congestion and not even being able to get through for emergency access. So a lot of challenges that we can think about overcoming as we think about different mode share splits. Key to the final recommendation is completion of the Tahoe Trail. So along the West Shore, completing the trail where it ends at Meeks Bay. going south to where it ends at Spring Creek Road. In all of the planning efforts, we've looked at making sure we can allow through traffic, but restricting the roadside parking and really thinking about changing the behavior of people and how they access the corridor. The result would be 37,400 fewer cars in the corridor every summer month, which again, it can be a really great opportunity in terms of really changing that travel experience and being able to improve it overall. Those mode share split numbers that I just talked about are based off of that 2018 visitation. Throughout this planning process, the team has done a number of different studies looking at what the existing conditions are, the visitation levels and how people are recreating and how they're traveling through the corridor. And some of the things that we found were that, you know, an intercept program where people stop at either end, either in the north, and then take transit to the recreation destination and then come back to the north, or stop in the south near the Y or West Way, take transit up to their recreation destination, and then back to the park and ride location. That travel patterns show that that could actually really work. And a lot of our case studies from other recreation areas, such as Muir Woods, Griffith Park Observatory, and other national park areas, really again show that these interventions do have success, and that there's ways to be able to implement them to be able to work. And we've seen that success on the 28 corridor as well. This mode split that we're looking at, again, it's based off that 2018 visitation number, but it could potentially have the system itself could be designed to accommodate a small, modest increase of 5% over that number. But really, as part of this plan development, the recommendation is, again, as Devin said, looking at that adaptive management to monitor to see how what the impacts are to the resources and to the cultural resources, to see if we need to scale down the model, or if it has the ability to flex a little bit more to be able to accommodate that 5% increase. So really, it's about the adaptive management and being able to adjust as needed. Next slide. And how we get there, we're recommending a 3-phase implementation piece. So that first phase really builds and leverages off of our existing resources, looking at what's on the ground, that we don't have to recreate physical resources and infrastructure, such as some of the parking areas, where we can have some short wins and build momentum for the future. In this first phase, we'd be really looking at developing the platform for reservation systems, for parking management systems, and building that system so it can really be coordinated throughout all of the recreation areas within the corridor, and then also really within the basin, so that there's really easy to use ability for people, both local, as we all are, to access and recreate in the corridor, but then also visitors as well. In this first phase of implementation, we're looking at achieving a mode share split of 15% of people arriving via transit, which again is building that behavior pattern and starting that shift as we develop the platform for future alternatives. Also within this phase, we'd be looking at evaluating some of the project alternatives specifically for the Tahoe trail alignments. Currently, we have some conceptual ideas for where those might be, where the trail alternatives might be, but that really will get refined and vetted out in this first phase through a feasibility study, and then trying to see and coordinating what those phased elements would be for implementation of the Tahoe Trail. We'd also be looking at implementing projects that have been previously planned and approved. The Forest Service has a number of projects within the Pope to Baldwin segment that have already gone through environmental planning and some design. So looking at being able to leverage those approved efforts and starting implementation there. We would also initiate some of the traffic flow congestion management pieces within Pope to Baldwin segment as well. Next slide. The second phase really is the big push to start transitioning people to transit. So in this alternative, we look at initiating those transit facilities both on the south shore near the Y or the West Way, at Sugar Pine Point State Park in the north, and then starting a more robust transit system to serve the corridor. In this phase, we would also be constructing the Tahoe Trail segment, so looking at how we can link pieces up. And really part of the project is, part of the corridor plan is thinking about how we can bundle projects. So instead of each jurisdiction and land management agency doing projects independently, the idea is to think about each project and how it really relates to the corridor overall and to those goals that Devin mentioned in terms of balancing visitor experience, the operations budget and infrastructure facilities that each land manager has, and then what we have as goals in terms of really wanting to protect natural and cultural resources. So thinking about how we can leverage projects and bundle them together to achieve those goals overall. In this phase, we would be really looking at improving the capacity for bike access to Pope and Baldwin, to the Pope Baldwin segment. So as many of you have experienced, the bike path through to Pope Beach and through that segment is a really great resource, and we're looking to build off of that and be able to increase the capacity for people to be able to bike through that corridor, so opportunities for cycle tracks that could be a shared transit lane as well. And then again, continuing to improve some of the traffic flow pieces, which really looks at a series of congestion management strategies around both queuing to Pope Beach, and then also along Jameson Beach Road, looking at reconfiguring some of those land uses, again, restricting the roadside parking, which all, through all of our traffic analysis, has really shown that we can achieve a lot of really great benefits in terms of improving traffic flow while still really thinking about what the overall experience wants to be. And as always, we'd really want to monitor and evaluate those improvements so we can adjust as needed. In this phase, we would be looking at 25,400 fewer cars in the corridor every summer month. So again, really big strides in terms of thinking about an improved overall experience. Next slide. And then the third phase, really this is the final refinement phase of looking, evaluating, and assessing how the previous phases went, and then understanding how we can adjust the system slightly to be able to really fine-tune those transit operations and parking management systems to achieve our split mode of 44% transit and 10% bike. We would also be looking at partnering with private entities to look at water transit opportunities as well. In this phase, we would be looking at constructing the Tahoe Trail segment through Emerald Bay. So in previous segments, it's more likely that the easier first phases of the Tahoe Trail, as after the feasibility study is complete, is to build trails to Emerald Bay, and then the final phase would be building that trail around Emerald Bay, and really having an incredible experience there. And as always, in this phase two, we'd be monitoring and evaluating those improvements as well, and really just trying to fine tune and adjust as needed. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Devin.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I do see there was a couple comments about having some folks, their screens cut off on some of the words, and I apologize for that. I don't see the setting to change it on the fly, and we will be sending these slides out afterwards for anyone that missed it. I just did want to summarize that we have done extensive outreach in the plan. There's an existing conditions report that summarizes our 15 days of data collection in the corridor, and a lot of other data sources we used. We've done a number of meetings with a variety of stakeholders, partner organizations, homeowners associations, online surveys, open houses. This is our third webinar, and we received lots of comments and questions, and had incorporated a lot of that into this plan. Some of the things that we heard from the public and other stakeholders, there's a lot of excitement that action is taking place in this corridor, and the recognition that something really needs to be done. The need for quick wins. If you have, obviously this is a big vision for the plan, but we want to really make sure that we're implementing it in a steady way so we can see improvements on the ground. There was a lot of comments around transit and the Tahoe Trail. Again, sort of back to those quick wins on project phasing. Visitor management and how we're managing visitors is a big topic of conversation. Funding and financing plan, partnerships, recreation access, and some of the ways we responded to those. With the transit, we really talked more about public and private transit, potential micro shuttles, micro transit, things like that. A lot of the Tahoe Trail comments we're going to be working on through the Tahoe Trail feasibility study. And then around visitor management, really, again, that's tools around adaptive management. And then really the need for more additional studies around visitation, visitor patterns, and potential management tools. And then also really heard from a lot of the neighbors throughout the corridor that there's a need to balance recreation access in those corridor neighborhoods in order to preserve quality of life and make sure that we're not causing issues in areas where we don't want those. The key to success and implementation is really going to be the corridor management team. Those agencies and partners that were organized around the plan are going to continue to be organized through its implementation. And through a series of agreements we're going to make as partners, that's how we're going to establish these working relationships. At a corridor management team level, we've really got, the discussion is around projects and priorities, operations and maintenance, planning, additional planning, technology, year-round access, and emergency and evacuation planning. And then as needed, we can elevate issues and key topics to the executive level of the partnership and basin agencies in order to get guidance and steering, in order to solve some of the problems that cross jurisdictional boundaries, require legislative changes, and broader basin-wide implications. So now we can open it up for our question and answer. So I do see there are a few questions put into the chat already. So Stephanie, I figure we can just alternate back and forth and we'll go until we answer the questions. And I know we said this webinar would go till, I think, 7 o'clock. So we do have another hour. So if we don't use all that time, we don't have to, but want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. Could you talk a little bit about, let's see, how will we address people that do not use devices for the reservation systems or the information, will devices be required to visit the corridor? iPhones, cell phones?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think I can combine that one with the comments and question about protocols for year-round residents versus part-time residents as well, because that would be part of what we would call that operations system. And that's where ORCA's expertise really came into play as part of this process. They helped develop the reservation system for Muir Woods and other areas that receive recreation access similar to SR 89. And so there's multiple ways for people to be able to, access that reservation system. It does not necessarily have to be a mobile device. You could use, other web pieces as well, but it also can there's typically a way to model those systems so that there's also the ability to withhold a certain portion of the, reservations per se, so that it can accommodate people who come on a first come, first served basis. So there's a way to both modulate, that digital divide piece in terms of thinking about equity and access in that realm. And then it's also similarly able to really dial into a system that allows you to have price calculations that can, again, think about addressing the needs for locals to maybe have a season pass or a discount versus visitors. So again, there's ways to be able to dial that system in, and that's what that first phase would really be looking at in terms of how that might operate and how it would be able to address the corridor as a whole in those recreation systems.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. We do have a couple questions actually that came in about anticipated timing of the first phase. And I would say that, we wanted to intentionally not have a solid date on there because of a couple things. One, some of the recommendations in phase one are projects that are already existing and planned and can be implemented fairly quickly. I know there's potentially going to be some work and some additional planning going on in the Pope to Baldwin corridor as early as next summer to look at some of those congestion improvements. There's also currently funding secured to do a feasibility study for the Tahoe Trail, the paved path through the rest of the corridor. So those ones are really starting, relatively soon. Other projects in phase one are more, 5 to 10 years out when you're talking about transit. There's a question in here about when parking restrictions would begin. We're not able to just, or we don't want to go in and restrict parking without first offering the transit options and the parking reservation system. So there's a lot of pieces that need to go into place and a lot of planning for more detailed implementation that does need to take place. But overall, that first phase you can talk about, and I guess a 5 to 10 year time frame, and then the overall plan is more of a 25-year timeline.
So there's
yeah.
Well, I was going to say there's a couple of questions about, I think, the timing of the feasibility study for the Tahoe Trail, and then a suite of questions about, where those trail locations might be and what's being analyzed. And so do you want to talk a little bit more about the timing for the feasibility study, Devin?
Yeah, so the feasibility study for the Tahoe Trail is going to begin, I guess, this winter, but mainly in next year. There will be work done to analyze potential routes for that Tahoe Trail. The corridor plan does identify several high-level routes. I would say that all of those maps are not to scale and shouldn't be used in any sense of those being final at all. Really just a guideline for starting discussion and having a starting point for additional work to be done. And during that feasibility process, we do have a lot of involvement from stakeholders, homeowners throughout the corridor, and we'll be considering a whole number of factors when determining what's the potential most feasible route for that trail. Did I miss anything on there, Stephanie?
I think that's good. I think that hits most of it.
And then I saw a couple questions for you in here. What road changes are we looking at to accommodate buses? And then about avalanche control in Emerald Bay.
Perfect. Yeah, so as part of phase one of the recommendations was to look at what's called a project study report. So that's a technical term for Caltrans study that looks at road design and operational improvements to think about the potential to, at the very end of the switchbacks as you're coming up to Emerald Bay, look at straightening one of those out. There's actually, as it curves around that very last one, there's an old road bed there that provides an opportunity to think about just really improving that functionality, which could allow for the bus that's being used in the model to be able to flex up a little bit larger, or to be able to potentially accommodate a bike trailer, right? So being able to think about that access to Emerald Bay would require some road changes potentially in Emerald Bay. So as part of the recommendations, one of the projects to spin off from this study in phase one would be an analysis to understand what those opportunities are, and thinking about that in terms of, the suite of analysis that is always needed in Tahoe, thinking about both, the benefits and then also the constraints too. And as part of that study, we would also look at avalanche control. That's part of that year-round access desire in terms of being able to provide opportunities for emergency access that goes through the corridor throughout the winter, and then also commuters too. There's a number of people that we spoke with that live and work on one side of the lake, but then work on the other side and commute through Emerald Bay. And to be able to reduce the amount of times that that's closed through the year would potentially require management changes to be able to think about avalanche control. So that would be part of that project study report, to look at what's really feasible and what would the benefits be and the impacts, to understand if we would move forward with that.
All right, thank you. I see a question in the chat that asked if you can discuss a little bit more the Sugar Pine Point Pier for emergency access, water taxis, et cetera.
Yeah, so and we did make changes to when the paid parking would begin. So that was part of, I think, a miscommunication in terms of thinking about establishing that base framework for the operations, transit and operations program, that in addition to that, they would start to be the revenue generation and the paid parking as part of that operation system. And then in terms of the Sugar Pine Point Pier, we have identified the need to improve Sugar Pine Point Pier to be able to allow for water taxi and then also for emergency access as well. So that would be, again, its own project that would go through its own environmental documentation and review to understand if it's extending the existing pier, building a new pier, and what those design standards would be.
I see a question in here about when the final plan will be available. So the final plan will actually be available tomorrow. So by attending this webinar, signing up for this webinar, you will get an email with these recordings, and I'll send a link to the final plan. So that will be coming out tomorrow for review. And I think we do have, we had incorporated a lot of the comments and feedback, and a lot of the questions tonight are very much in line with what we've heard tonight. There's a question about Meeks Bay. There was any discussion about Meeks Bay, and then also a question about kayak summer storage at Meeks Bay Resort. So Meeks Bay Resort in Meeks Bay is part of the corridor plan. The corridor plan recognizes that there is a separate Forest Service project happening at Meeks Bay right now to look at the restoration project for that area in the marina. That is a separate environmental analysis and environmental document that's ongoing right now. So this plan didn't want to make any recommendations that were counter to that process, and really just identifies Meeks Bay and whatever recommendations come out of the restoration project feed into the corridor plan and are consistent with the corridor plan. In terms of kayak storage, I know kayak storage and at all beaches and resorts around the community is definitely something that partners are talking about and want to see more of.
There was a couple of questions talking about biking and bicycles on trails versus on the highway, and then the mode share split increase to 10% biking. And really that mode share split to 10% biking really is achieved primarily through the bicycle improvements to Pope and Baldwin. As we looked at the mode share split that we've presented as an average overall for the corridor, but the most significant results that we would achieve, we recognize would likely be Pope Baldwin. And currently 15% of the people that visit just Pope Baldwin actually have responded in previous surveys that they access that location via bike. So by improving some of the facilities, we're hoping to just really build on that success, and then also the success in the north as well, going to Meeks Bay. And then in terms of bicyclists being required to use the trail and stay off the highways, that is something that typically there's dual facilities that are built into the system. So there's areas within this corridor that will always be constrained for bikes on highways, and being able to provide improved facilities for them for bike lanes. So that extra shoulder bit that you get on the roadway, to be able to provide for those road cyclists who will likely not switch to a shared use path. And you can't force them to use a shared use path, because that's they're usually a much more confident cyclist and want to be on the roadway because that's how fast they're going. But it will take a significant number of people who would much rather be on a separated shared use path to be able to provide them a facility.
I do see a question in here about parking fine increase. That is something for illegal parking on the 28 corridor in Nevada, that they increase the ticket price of that. It is a recommendation in this corridor plan to do that. In order to do that, we do need to change the California Vehicle Code. So that will require some work with the state in order to get that changed, but that is one of the recommendations to increase that fine and enforce it. I think the other key thing is when we eliminate roadside parking, making physical barriers as to where people can't park there, so you don't have to write them tickets because they physically can't park in those areas, but also recognize during the shoulder season and winter that there is roadside parking needs for recreation access that aren't necessarily served by off-highway parking. And then Stephanie, here, there's a question in here, a couple of them, just about parking in neighborhood streets and concerns about overflow from the highway going into the neighborhoods. How was that addressed?
Yeah, and I think that goes to your response to one of the questions too, in terms of this timing of restricting parking. One of the things that I think we've seen and we're very cognizant of before the East Shore Express on 28 was established was understanding that you have to provide people an alternative. So, and you have to be able to price that accordingly as well. So being able to make sure, number one, that there's an easier way to be able to access the recreation destination by using transit, so making sure that it's frequent and that it's convenient, and being able to make sure that we're restricting parking to the extent that we don't impact these neighborhoods. That's something that we've definitely taken into account, and as part of that adaptive management would want to monitor and make sure that if we are seeing that we're implementing other strategies to address it as well.
Thanks, Stephanie. In terms of bus services between State Line and Emerald Bay, can you summarize, and maybe I can take this one, summarize what is available now versus various segments of the route under the corridor plan as to become available? So for transit and the transit rollout, currently from South Lake Tahoe, there is no service to Emerald Bay. Throughout the years, the Nifty 50 trolley has operated, and we've really shown that when a service operates, people ride it. We also have shown through our travel patterns that people are likely to take transit because they're going and coming from the same direction. So this plan in phase 1 recommends a pilot route from the existing Snow Park parking lot near Taylor Creek to Emerald Bay. The advantage here is the infrastructure for the most part already exists. So it's a lower cost to implement and can be implemented quicker. I think the other phases, phase 2 and phase 3, then start to expand that from really the corridor to the outsides of the corridor for park and rides. So Sugar Pine State Park in the north, and then somewhere to be identified near the Y in South Lake Tahoe. We also do want to try to take advantage of the main routes and get people to not get in their cars at all. And if they're staying at State Line in South Shore or somewhere along North Shore, really taking the main transit routes from there and connecting and being able to travel into the corridor without needing to drive their vehicles anywhere. Stephanie, I did see, going back to one of those questions, there was a follow-up on that and asking about when capacity of the area will be assessed in terms of designing the reservation systems, peak period, pricing, and things like that.
So we do have as that phase 1 piece, so hopefully starting fairly soon as we're trying to build towards developing those infrastructure pieces to develop a system that's more robust that Devin described. In these initial pieces, we would develop individual capacity analysis for individual recreation sites through the corridor to be able to allow, again, that to really influence and help adjust some of the fine tuning of developing that reservation and parking management system. So we intend that to really be sort of the first legs of the transit study. In the initial phases too, we could look at building off of similar approaches that the Muir Woods case study showed in terms of really building those short run transit systems that Devin talked about, and then peeling back the parking in association with that at Emerald Bay. There's a couple of questions about, what might start now, and there's really plans that the Forest Service is looking at mostly within the Pope to Baldwin Beach area, where they've done a lot of planning and have a number of projects that are somewhat ready to go, looking at addressing some of the issues and congestion around the Pope Beach access. So moving that kiosk in, thinking about, again, those management systems to be able to alleviate the queue that happens and the congestion that happens along the road there. And then there's also a suite of projects associated with the Tallac Historic Site for connecting up a loop road, being able to really have an internal circulation system so people don't have to come back onto the highway, and really distributing that demand that right now really stays at Camp Rich and Pope Beach, to be able to allow people to get to Taylor Creek, to be able to get to those other recreation areas without having to get back on the highway.
Thanks. And then I do have a question in here about some of the Jameson Beach improvements about ice cream parlor, Jameson Beach Road phasing, Pope Beach kiosk. So a lot of the improvements in the Jameson Beach Pope corridor really span across multiple phases. In the first phase, there are identified to work and plan improvements at the Pope Beach intersection. That kiosk could be moved down towards the end of the beach so more cars can queue and not back onto the highway. There is currently identified the need to move the land uses from the mountainside, such as the ice cream shop, the bike shop, the coffee shop, move those land uses, not the physical buildings, but the land uses to the other side, to the lakeside, and cut down on crossings. But we also, again, adaptively want to manage the congestion at that intersection. So if we do changes in phase one, and those phases make a big difference and reduce congestion to a desired level, we can kind of stop there. But if they don't get the results we need, there's additional improvements we could do at those intersections. And then as far as the park and ride parking structure built in South Shore, that may or may not be near or at Westway. That really is to be determined. We want to make it at as close to the Y as possible so it fits in with existing transit routes. And then Stephanie, there was a question in there. Next person asked kind of about park and ride lots and how many spaces we know we need to have. Can you talk a little bit about all the different factors that go into calculating parking?
Yeah, so we have within the plan calculations that show how many spaces are displaced based on previous studies and evaluations of the roadside parking condition. And depending on that mode, that split in terms of how many people are coming from the north and how many people are coming from the south, those percentages, what the recommended distribution of those spaces might be as for park and rides. So the plan looks at, again, sort of these two dumbbells, one in the north, which is really, we're looking at Sugar Pine Point State Park that actually has some underused parking, believe it or not, that State Parks has talked to us about that. They really raised their hand as saying that it was an opportunity to think about intercepting people at that location. If you're coming from the north, that it could connect into TART, because TART actually turns around at the current parking area as you're entering the campground to the east side of the lake there, that there's a parking area that would serve as that park and ride location in the north. And that location actually is sized almost appropriately for what the demand could be for that displaced parking within the corridor for the percentage of people that might use it from the north. From the south, the challenge is trying to find that location where we might be able to find an opportunity for a park and ride. Ideally, we would be looking somewhere close to the Y, again, for that idea that it really wants to tie into the mainline transit, right? You want people to be able to connect in without having to drive their car. So if they can already get on the transit system that connects from State Line, that connects throughout South Shore, to transfer at the Y, to then hop on the recreation shuttle and explore the corridor. That's the ideal situation, right? And so in terms of thinking about that displaced number, we have calculated what that demand might be, but recognize that there's some other things to think about as they refine that parking system, that there might be a increased amount of stay from people. So part of our analysis in terms of looking at what the demand counts would be was looking at how long people stay in the corridor, especially at Emerald Bay, where some people are there for 15 minutes and some people are there for 2 weeks. So looking at that stretch of what is the turnover, and will the regular user turnover increase or decrease based on transit use. So that might say that you might need a few more parking spaces, but our idea is really trying to, again, tie into those mainline systems so that we don't have to do a one-for-one parking replacement within the corridor, but look at really what the site capacities are, how many people that means, and then, can we drive up some of the capacity in terms of how many occupants are per vehicle to really manage the parking number as well. So we have within the corridor some general calculations for what was existing and then what that might mean for displacement, but also some considerations to take into account, and that will be taken into account when the final system is developed.
Great, thanks. I do see a question in here about, emergencies, wildfires. This question specifically is asking about building a new fire station near Spring Creek, a couple different places. This plan doesn't identify building a new fire station. It's not really a fire emergencies response plan in that sense. However, it does recognize the importance of the transportation system for emergency response and includes specific recommendations on improving Fallen Leaf Lake Road as an additional access for emergency vehicles, addition of new public safety, public use piers, identification of additional emergency pullouts, identification of, I believe, one or two new helipad locations, and then also the year-round access again provides that. And then I would say if for more specific on local emergencies, risk of wildfires, especially in the corridor, check with your local fire department or Fire Adapted Communities. TahoeFireAdaptedCommunities.com, I believe, has more information, but public safety and emergency evacuation is definitely identified as something in the plan. Let's see, trying to go through.
There was a question that I thought you might, you're a little bit more familiar with the RTP than I am, but I don't know if you would be able to answer it. There was a question that sort of alluded to connecting to transit from the bay.
Yeah.
That would really be part of that regional transportation plan.
Yeah, I saw a couple questions. One about, connecting transit to the Bay Area and getting people to come to Tahoe without their vehicles in the first place. The Tahoe Regional Planning Agency has what's called the Regional Transportation Plan, which is really the higher level document that outlines the vision for the transportation system. And regional connections to the Bay Area, Reno, and surrounding areas for transit, rail, and alternate modes is absolutely part of the plan. And this would ideally sync in with that. I also saw a question about regional revenue, and charging visitors that come in with their vehicles. And there are conversations and identified in this plan. It does talk about a variety of funding structures. The Tahoe Transportation District does have an initiative called One Tahoe, which is looking at regional revenue generation that could help to pay for this plan and implementation of this plan if that is implemented.
There's a couple of different questions, and I think you talked about it previously about enforcement and the need for higher fines. That is one of those items that we have flagged to be discussed at that executive level and potentially with the bi-state working group for transportation, knowing that it will take some changes in California specifically to allow for the higher fine, and then to allow for different technologies for enforcement too. As there's recommendations in the plan to think about how we can improve enforcement, and then where needed, put up temporary barriers to really, again, be able to provide tools to people to be able to do the enforcement that will be needed in these interim phases as you're really shifting that behavior.
Yeah, I think the key.
But we have flagged a number of those items that really have are those sticky issues that really need some high level input to be able to make the change.
Yeah, I think if you prevent people from parking illegally in the first place, you don't need to spend as much time and effort on enforcing the illegal parking because it can't happen. So I think it's a combination of those things, absolutely. There's a question in here about expanding on the use of water taxi to Emerald Bay and Sugar Pine. That really came out of discussions with some of our private business partners. Camp Richardson Marina, Bob Hassett currently operates a water taxi between several of the South Shore locations and has indicated interest in expanding those services. Homewood Marina has also expressed interest. So that would really be something like a public-private partnership that gets people the experience on the lake, connects them to the recreation destinations. But those, again, also come with additional projects. You need enhanced piers, improved piers. You need facilities like restrooms and trash cans at those piers to accommodate those use, but gives people a different way to experience the lake and a way for the private businesses to get involved and contribute to getting people out of their vehicles.
Right, and there is one question about, you know, again, it's that equitable access piece about making sure that people, you know, how this plan could affect people who might have less resources. And really, I think that's almost the beauty of being able to have these tools in place, is that right now you really can't access Emerald Bay without a car. And the equitable access for that could be in question there. So being able to actually provide a system where it's more desirable and easier and, you know, low cost or free to be able to access via transit is a real opportunity.
This question is about how the plan is being paid for, how the income would be received and divided, how much would go back to the community for upkeep as well as improvements. And really, as terms of how it's being paid for and how the operations goes, there's really a variety of sources for a lot of the transportation projects and improvements. There's federal, state, and local funding. Federal, like the Federal Lands Access Program, or FLAP. There's the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act. There's the newly passed Great American Outdoors Act. There's state funds such as California Active Transportation Plan funds, SB1. So there's a variety of sources for projects. The key thing and what was the success so far on the 28 corridor is they were able to work with through interlocal agreement, which some similar agreement will have to be drafted on the California side to have the revenue from the parking paid parking system stay in the corridor. So it actually helps pay for Washoe County and Nevada State Parks to maintain the trail and maintain the facilities. So I think that's one of the important things for this corridor, is understanding that we need a lot of that income received to stay local and go back into the system that people are paying to enjoy. So that's one of those key recommendations. But that could be through a variety of different sources and funding streams.
Yeah, and I think that goes to that, you know, operational piece of, although this isn't an operation plan, knowing that, you know, by working together, people can have those resources to be able to look at, you know, trash and litter, you know, having the built facilities such as restrooms and so forth to be able to really improve the overall facilities in the corridor too.
I see a question about expanding parking at the Desolation Wilderness parking lot at Meeks Bay. This plan does not currently identify expanding parking at that parking lot, but does identify Meeks Bay as an area to monitor parking and adjust or come up with additional parking strategies if parking gets to a point where it's, you know, backing up into the highway more and becoming more and more short supply.
I'm just going through to see if I see any new ones.
I think it looks like we got to most of them.
So there was a question about the entry fee to the basin, and that if you look on, it should be on TTD's website, correct?
Yeah, One Tahoe.
That's what's referred to as One Tahoe. So you might check out TTD's website for a little bit more information on One Tahoe.
Looks like we got one more that just talks about, I think it says much of the development seems keyed towards increasing visitation in Emerald Bay. How have you calculated carrying capacity of this resource to avoid overuse or degrading the experience, the resource itself? So I would say that the plan is not looking at increasing, as we said earlier, the plan is not looking at increasing visitation to any one hotspot. It is based on the 2018 visitation when we did our data collection. And that adaptive management piece is getting exactly to that question of, if we see that the resource is being degraded and there's excessive litter or trail damage, those transit pieces and those parking management systems can be adjusted in order to adjust visitation. The key thing that we've outlined in this model that we've that we followed from example Muir Woods is really spreading out that peak. So instead of having the majority of people arrive between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. and really put a big strain on the resource during that peak period of time, the parking management and transit systems can help spread that out. So you're able to serve the similar or the same amount of people with less of those peak demands and peak impacts, and really spread that out and that use out to preserve the experience and to make sure that staff has adequate levels to manage that. There's another question.
Exactly.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I was going to say, building on that, this is really about being able to create that system that you do have those tools where you can adjust it, right? Right now, there's no mechanisms in place to be able to dial down the access, and that would be what we would be able to achieve by being able to have a system in place where we can look at the impacts and adjust accordingly.
This question is, there was a question about the Rubicon Peak neighborhood trail parking. That suggestion or recommendation was removed from the plan based on feedback from the Rubicon neighborhood. So that was removed. And then there's a question about how will resident stakeholders be included in what moves forward. So all of the homeowners and anyone on this email today is automatically going to be added to our email list. So you'll get all of the news and updates. And then as we move forward with specific projects such as the Tahoe Trail feasibility study, all of the homeowners associations and residents will be invited to participate through stakeholder meetings, surveys, other Zoom calls. Obviously, the current situation has made meeting in person difficult. For the corridor plan, we had focus groups, we had one-on-one meetings, we had stakeholder meetings with sticky notes and maps. So there's a lot of ways that we've engaged the stakeholders through those and getting feedback. So looking to continue doing that as we move forward. And that was the last question that came in. There is one more question about how many parking spots will be available in South Shore in this plan, the park and ride. Again, there's a number of calculations that need to go on that. And in the appendices of the final plan, when that comes out, there is a table that will outline all of those parking spots. But it really does depend on where we're able to identify a location and if we can take advantage of existing parking, such as the high school in South Lake or South Tahoe Airport.
And there was a question, one that I hadn't seen before, that was about, did we look at, or could you control the number of people at either side? And, in terms of limiting the number of vehicles allowed to enter. And because this is a state highway and there's residential access, there's business access that is needed off of it, you can't restrict the through traffic or limit that number of vehicles that can enter. So being able to give people who want to stop a different opportunity in terms of, if you want to stop within the corridor and recreate, that would be the people that we would be wanting to shift to transit.
Yeah, there's another question came in about asking why the plan does not discuss reducing demand for the corridor and looking at keeping within the physical capacity. And I think we've addressed that a little bit tonight, saying that, additional studies are needed at site-specific areas around capacity and natural resource conditions. But I would say that the plan, by putting in transit parking management systems and removing roadside parking, we're going to be controlling demand and access through those systems, and gives us the tools to dial those up or back based on resource conditions and policy decisions. So it's really giving it, right now, there really is no control in the corridor, and all of these tools are giving us control through the system. There's this question came in, what's the timeline for combined bike emergency vehicle lane through Pope Baldwin? Is the additional cycle track through Pope, was that phase 2 or phase 3, Stephanie?
We had it as phase 3, I believe.
So this is a question about process for plan adoption, what agencies are involved, what's the timeline. So as I said, the final plan will be coming out tomorrow. On the September 30th, it will be going before the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency Governing Board for consideration. On October 9th, it will be going to the Tahoe Transportation District Board for consideration, and then additional partners that will incorporate or adopt or accept the plan in some form include the United States Forest Service, California Department of Transportation, El Dorado County. There's a variety of other partners who will be doing some sort of recognition of the plan, and really that next step is having all of those partners sign on to some sort of partnership agreement to begin implementation of the plan. Another question about congestion at Jamison Beach Road and 89 and how we're reducing that. Do you want to handle that one, Stephanie?
Yeah, I think you spoke to it a little bit. So in some of the other presentations that we've had, we presented the analysis that was done to look at pedestrian crossings, and then also the other issues in terms of roadside parking, what was causing the delay at Jamison Beach Road. And the findings really showed that if we restrict roadside parking, and then if we shift the land uses from the I'll say mountainside of 89 to the lake side of 89, so that people don't have to cross the road. So the ice cream shop, the bike rental shop, so the bike rental shop is actually on the same side of the road as the bike path itself, that those shifts really can, I think, reduce the pedestrian crossings. I think it was by 80–90%, and really improve congestion management through that area. So looking at that, again, phase approach, where the first phase is we shift the pedestrian crossing, so low cost, just paint on the street, to be able to shift it from its current location to the western leg of that intersection, which would allow a free left from people exiting Jamison Beach Road and improve traffic flow that way. And the second phase would then be to restrict the parking, and then to be able to shift the land uses. So again, sort of phasing those approaches to see how we're improving, what the benefits are, and then in the end phase, if needed, to look at a signalized light, but really trying to see how we can get to that point, and if it's really needed.
Thanks, Stephanie. So we had another question that just came in, was on the same topic. Question about limiting the size of vehicles through the corridor. The hairpins at at Emerald Bay, just south of Emerald Bay, do limit the size of vehicles. Limits the size of private or commercial vehicles that can go through, but it also limits the size of transit vehicles that can go through. So that is one of the restricting parts through that corridor. And then this question is about the plan, asking if it's still conceptual. I would say that this plan really collects and organizes all of the different projects and possibilities throughout the corridor, but to some extent it is somewhat still conceptual. There are projects in there that were already in the planning phase as this started. So those are very much more known, but there's also further out plans and ideas in this that are definitely conceptual still and need additional planning to be done and follow up on them. This question's about ways to help control traffic to keep it flowing through Highway 89, and I think that's the biggest reason one of the biggest reasons it was recommended to remove roadside parking is as you get parking on the highway, that is what clogs it up and slows people down. So when you remove that, that will help through traffic getting through Highway 89. But that was the last question that came in. I know we are ending a little early, but I think we've gotten through, we had 52 questions submitted, and I hope we got to all of them. If we didn't get yours exactly in the wording, we might have summarized multiple questions together. But we are thankful that all of you attended today's meeting. We will be sending the slides and materials out from this presentation tomorrow. And look forward to continuing to stay engaged with people as we move forward through this plan. And let's see, there are one, I can squeeze in another one. There is a question about Eagle Falls parking. So Eagle Falls is definitely in the plan and identified. Along the highway parking at Eagle Falls, potentially being moved and transformed into a transit stop. One of the challenges with the Eagle Falls parking lot was we want to make sure that we maintain access for some of the recreation and hiking opportunities, but also realize a lot of people use that for short sightseeing trips. So that parking lot will be part of all of the parking management strategies at Emerald Bay. And then Stephanie, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I think you did a great job covering questions with me. I would just say thanks to everybody for your time tonight and for the really thoughtful questions.
Yep, thank you.